I'm 85 years old, and if you're planning on scrolling past this because you think you've heard enough about artificial intelligence, then you have already made the choice to become a ghost. I'm not here to talk to you about silicon chips or lines of code. I'm here to talk to you about the death of a word that used to mean everything. That word is facility. This morning, the headlines are screaming about a tsunami. They're showing charts of 2026 where 40% of white-collar jobs, the doctors, the lawyers, the managers who thought they were safe, are being erased in a single sweep of an algorithm. The pundits call it disruption. The billionaires call it efficiency. But as I look at the quiet, empty office buildings in the city, I don't see progress. I see the exact same cold, grey fog that settled over the steel mills of my youth. You think this is a tech story? It isn't. It is a story about the moment a system decides you are no longer useful and how it never bothers to say goodbye. I remember the sound of a key turning in a lock for the last time. It's a heavy, final sound. I heard it in the 1980s when the men I grew up with, men who could shape iron with their bare hands, were told that a robotic arm could do it cheaper. They were told their utility had expired. Those men didn't just lose their paychecks, they lost their names. They became invisible. And now, as I watch the young professionals of 2026 staring at their screens with that same flickering fear in their eyes, I realize that the tsunami isn't coming for your job. It's coming for your identity. The system has spent the last 20 years convincing you that your degree, your title, and your utility were your shield. It told you that if you studied hard and followed the path, you would be indispensable. But utility is a trap. It is the cold, calculated measure of what you can provide for a machine that doesn't have a heart. And the moment that machine finds a cheaper way to process a spreadsheet or write a legal brief, your utility vanishes like smoke in a storm. You can turn this off and go back to the news. You can tell yourself that your utility is different, that you have a human touch the tsunami can't reach. But that's exactly what the foreman and the steel mill said in 1982. They sat in the diners and promised each other that a machine would never have the eye for the metal. They were wrong, and they spent the rest of their lives as ghosts in their own towns. I am 85 years old, and I am watching the most educated generation in history walk straight into the same furnace. The question isn't whether the machine can do your job. The question is what is left of you when your utility is gone. If you aren't ready to answer that, the tsunami has already won. The memory of 1982 smells like cold grease and stale coffee. I can still see the faces of the men sitting in the diner across from the main gate of the mill, men who had spent 30 years believing that their sweat was the collateral for their future. When the first robotic arms arrived on the assembly lines, the story we were told was a comforting one. We were told that technology would take the burden off our backs. We were told that it was an evolution, not an execution. But the most dangerous part of the story wasn't the machines. It was the promise of retraining. It was the lie that your utility could be simply recalibrated like a piece of hardware. I watched men my age, men with mortgages and children in college, being handed brochures for new opportunities in the service sector and data entry. They were told that their years of mastery of a high-pressure steam and molten iron could be traded for a few weeks of learning to type or file papers. It was a cruel joke. The system didn't want to retrain them, it wanted to manage their disappearance. It needed them to stay quiet and keep hoping until the transition was complete. My friend Frank was one of them. He spent 6 months in a windowless room trying to learn a modern skill, only to realize that he wasn't being taught to compete. He was being taught to wait for a retirement that would never be enough. History is a master of the mask. In the 1980s, the mask was a robotic arm in a car factory. In 2026, the mask is a clean, white interface on your laptop screen. But the anatomy of the betrayal is identical. When I hear the leaders today talking about universal basic income or AI readiness programs for the millions of white-collar workers being displaced by the tsunami, I don't hear a solution. I hear the same brochure I saw in 1982. It is the language used by a system that has already moved on. It is the anesthetic they give you so you don't scream while they harvest what's left of your stability. Frank died a few years after the mill closed. He didn't die of an accident, he died of the realization that he had become a surplus. His utility had been his pride, the way he looked his family in the eye. When that was gone, he was just a man sitting on a porch, watching the weeds grow over the place where he used to matter. As you sit at your desk in 2026, looking at an AI that can do in 3 seconds what took you a decade to master, you are standing where Frank stood. You are being told that the system will augment you, that it will help you. But I've seen the end of that story. I've seen the silence that follows the promise. The system doesn't want your growth, it wants your compliance during its next great liquidation. The tsunami isn't a wave of tech, it's a wave of obsolescence. And it doesn't care how many retraining badges you have on your profile. I have to confess my own arrogance. Even after I saw the mills close in the 80s, even after I watched men like Frank wither away on their porches, I still believed in the fortress of the desk. I thought that if I could get my son away from the grease and the smoke, he would be safe. I remember the day he graduated with his degree in law. I stood there, looking at that expensive piece of paper in its mahogany frame, and I felt a profound sense of relief. I told him, "You won't have to bleed for a living. You have a title, you have an education, you have permanent utility." I truly believed that the system had a different set of rules for the people who worked in air-conditioned rooms. I thought that thinking was a sacred human territory, a high ground that the rising tide of machines could never reach. I was proud of the fact that he sat in a high-rise office, moving words and numbers across a screen. I thought I had built him a castle. I didn't realize that I had simply moved him to a cleaner, quieter factory. What I didn't see, what I was too proud to notice, is that to the system, a brain is no different from a bicep. If your value is based solely on what you can produce for a balance sheet, you are an expense to be minimized. In the 1980s, the expense was the welder. In 2026, the expense is the analyst, the coder, and the administrator. The tsunami doesn't care how much you paid for your degree or how prestigious your firm is. It only cares about the shortest path to a result. I watched my son realize this 3 months ago when the firm he had given 15 years to told him they were restructuring. They didn't need his 15 years of judgment, they needed the 3 seconds of output an algorithm could provide for the price of electricity. My regret is that I taught him to trust the path. I taught him to find his identity and his utility to a structure that views him as a line item. I saw him come home, sit at his kitchen table, and look at his hands. Hands that didn't know how to do anything but type. He looked exactly like the men from the diner in 1982. The same hollow stare, the same realization that the castle was made of sand. I had spent my life trying to protect him from the grease, only to leave him completely unarmed against the code. We thought our education was a shield, but it was just a different kind of leash. We traded the mastery of the physical world for the safety of a cubicle, and now the cubicle is being erased. The cost of that safety wasn't just money, it was the ability to survive without the system's permission. I have to ask you, if your title was taken away tomorrow, would there be anything left of you that the tsunami couldn't wash away? The tsunami of 2026 is a cleansing of the utility trap. It is the final, brutal proof that if you live only to be a resource for the system, you will eventually be replaced by a more efficient one. I've lived through 85 years of shifts, from the clatter of the mills to the silence of the cloud, and the only people I've seen survive with their dignity intact are those who realize that their value had nothing to do with their utility. The machine wants your output, it doesn't want your soul. If you want to escape the ghost status that claimed the men of 1982 and is claiming the professionals of today, you must find the parts of yourself that are completely, beautifully useless to the machine. True sovereignty isn't about competing with the code, it's about leaving the factory altogether. I told my son to stop looking at his resume and start looking at his surroundings. I told him to find skills that don't require a centralized server to function, skills that are anchored in the physical world, in human connection and in local resilience. The only thing an algorithm cannot replace is a life that doesn't need an algorithm to justify itself. Real power in the age of the tsunami is the ability to walk away from the desk and still be a man. It is the mastery of your own environment, the strength of your own hands, and the depth of the relationships that the digital world can only mimic, never feel. The system will offer you a universal basic income, a digital tether to keep you quiet while the tsunami recedes. They will call it a safety net, But in 1982, we called it a surrender. It is the final trade, your autonomy for a survival that belongs to someone else. I've seen the end of that road, and it is paved with the same regret I saw in Silas and Frank. They died waiting for the system to find a new utility for them, not realizing that the system had already forgotten their names. Don't wait for the machine to give you a reason to exist. Find what is real, find what is local, find what the tsunami cannot touch because it doesn't belong to the digital ocean. The loop of history is closing, and the message is written in the silence of those empty office buildings. In 1930, they promised protection. In 1971, they promised stability. In 1982, they promised retraining. And in 2026, they are promising AI-driven prosperity. Every time the word utility was the lure, and every time the people paid the price in time they could never get back. I'm an old man, and my time is almost up. But yours is being harvested right now, one keystroke at a time. Don't be the ink they use to write their next grand illusion. Be the hand that writes its own story. Because when the tsunami finally clears, the only thing left standing will be the people who refuse to be just a variable in a calculation. What part of you is worth more than the electricity it takes to replace you?